Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Well, what is that? Hello, everybody. It's Mr. Second Amendment. We are here in the third installment of my podcast series. Now, a couple things to mention first while you think on that. And I'm sure there's already people listening now that know exactly what that is. First thing I want to say is don't be worried. I still have plenty of content projected here in terms of business as usual, gear and gun reviews, shooting videos, instructional videos, everything I'm about, and everything that you're used to seeing from me. That's not going to change. This is not the new thing now exclusively. This just happens to be for a temporary moment with everything going on. This just happens to be the best way to reach out. And I didn't want you guys to feel neglected. Also, I do have plans to get some guests on here. I've got 3 very close friends who I think would be very interesting guests when it comes to this stuff. But in the meantime, at least for the moment, this is more of a monologue format. And I hope you do it, enjoy it, and I would like to thank you for being here. And I would also like to thank my international listeners. I got people all over the world and also across the pond, believe it or not, that do subscribe to my channel. I got people in Great Britain, Ireland, Australia, Germany, France, everywhere. Even people in the continent of Africa, believe that or not. And I desperately, actually personally hope that I have people in Hong Kong that are listening to me. Keeping it a little off topic for the second. Saw a meme going around, and it had the Hong Kong protesters, and I hope you're up to speed on that situation. And the meme said, "Be the Americans that they think you are." And you know what? I don't think it was wrong. And I think it's actually a pretty decent point. But ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, as American sons and daughters, and those internationally listening, I welcome you. So the third installment here. And I will admit that I do have an adult beverage here. We're just doing some chill. Going to be talking about some interesting issues or topics. But chiefly and primarily, I want to introduce to you a interesting way to look at our Second Amendment and our rights. So let's get back to what you just heard. Why would I start this podcast like that? Well, first of all, what is it? Despite what I've said in the past, or last podcast, about the current state of high school civics, I do hope sincerely that people understand what that was. And actually, for my international listeners, you might actually be able to cite what that is. And in fact, that is our First Amendment to our United States Constitution. Now, I have to admit to you as well that I have a very limited amount of notes. It's actually a 3x5 card. Got it right here. And I wanted to write down the First Amendment verbatim just so I don't make any mistakes from memory. And then on the back of it, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to throw you this. If the First Amendment means anything, it means that a state has no business telling a man, sitting alone in his house, what books he may read or what films he may watch. I would actually be very impressed for the people who can identify that quote. It actually comes from Justice Marshall, Thurgood Marshall. He was replaced by, if I remember right, and I apologize if I have this wrong, I believe, if I remember, he was replaced by Justice Clarence Thomas. I think that was, Lyndon Baines Johnson? President Johnson nominated him. And actually, if my history degree is serving me here, I think that was actually a very high majority there that he got in his nomination hearing. But also, moving away from that, just getting more to the point, Justice Marshall here was known for being a little bit on the left side of the House. Yes, of course. And in fact, beyond that, he practiced what is called judicial activism, which may require its own podcast for those interested. But it is an idea of which I personally renounce. But the reason why I bring this up, because I thought he's got an idea going here. I think he was pretty on point when it came to this particular issue of mention. Now, we're not just talking about books and films. There's a little bit more to actually this quote. And really, what Justice Marshall was saying here, kind of about our thoughts as regular American citizens, and the fact that we should be able to consume the media that we want to consume and think the thoughts that we want to think. And on top of that, I would also implore you, please, to always be a student. Always be obsessed with learning, acquiring more knowledge. Always be obsessed with learning more. And I do not believe ever that I am perfectly squared away and I got everything taken care of and I'm totally set on everything. I have some pretty strongly held beliefs, as you can already tell by now, but I'm always learning more things. And I think that's important here. Now, going back to the First Amendment, why would I open up this podcast with the First Amendment? Real quick on it, going back to it, Congress shall make no law. And now, if you actually look at the style of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, that was actually written by James Madison, who would later be our fourth president of the United States. But seemed like every amendment, not to mention the preamble to the United States Constitution, we the people of the United States, nor the form more perfect union, all that. But on top of that, every amendment, every purpose, and even if you look at the articles, all of the articles of the Constitution, everything kind of has its own preamble, kind of states its purpose. There's kind of a thesis there. But in the First Amendment, they talk about Congress shall make no law. Now, those who have hopefully brushed up on your Constitution, you know that's Article 1, legislative branch. Congress was to be the only branch of government that was to make the law. Now, they can't approve it, right? That's Article 2, the executive, but they make the law. And in this case, the Bill of Rights is enshrining and actually making a directive here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Okay, so that means, we're not going to have an official state or national church. The federal national government is not going to have a preferred or favored priority kind of religion or church. But also it goes on to say, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So you can essentially here, freedom of religion is what we would call it. Pray to whichever God you want. Believe in any religion or subscribe to any church or anything you want or not. You don't have to. You're not forced to. The state, the government is not going to force that upon you because they can't. Nextly, or abridging the freedom of speech, which later got expanded to be the freedom of expression through the courts over time, Article 3, or of the press. So despite the current situation with our woes, maybe would be the best word to use, with the media and how things are going on these days, probably deserves its own podcast. But this was meant to be, you can be a newspaper publication or media outlet and be critical of the government or government institutions or particular public figures, public servants. You could be critical of these people or things, government, the state at large. You don't have to worry about that, at least from the state. Moving on. Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. So that is actually a very important part here. Peaceable assembly. Right? Because what happens when a peaceful protest or gathering or assembly becomes violent and chaotic and people are getting hurt, dragged off to the hospital, crazy stuff is going on. Well, now it becomes an unlawful assembly because that is in direct violation of the First Amendment. In terms of peaceable, you cannot advocate for violence, direct threats, harming others, inciting a riot. These are things you cannot do with your First Amendment. Yes, First Amendment does have restrictions, as our intellectual opponents, pro-gun control people, would love to cite. And they do. Chiefly about the Second Amendment. Sometimes it feels like it applies to all of it, in their opinion. Moving on. And to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So you can call out the government. You can sue the government. You can do these things. And all in all, between Congress shall make no law and the freedom of religion aspect, exercising whatever you want, praying to whatever God you want or not, freedom of speech and the press to publish things, well, freedom of expression is what it is now, or to peaceably assemble, to protest, to sue and petition the government. All these things are covered in our First Amendment. And these are all things that the state or the government cannot arrest you or fine you, or even worse, on the very far end of the spectrum here, secret police showing up to your house in the middle of the night, taking you away, never to be seen again. These are all things that the government cannot do, because you can have free speech or expression, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, publish very critical, very scathing articles about public officials, calling people out. You can sue the government. Now, all of this stuff, all right, so we're not, hopefully here, we're not all strangers to the First Amendment, and I very sincerely hope, at least for my fellow Americans, that everything I'm saying here is not relatively new news for you, and I don't suspect it is. I'm sure most, hopefully all of everyone listening right now, you guys understand that this is our First Amendment. Now, I'm Mr. Second Amendment, and of course, as you can see over the years, I've dealt with Second Amendment related things, but why would I start this podcast with the First Amendment? And if I recall correctly, 1791, this was ratified after the Constitution already was, mid-December, if I remember right. But why would I bring all of this up? Well, it's all leading to this, which is what I said earlier. I want to introduce to you a different way of looking at the Second Amendment. And whether you're seriously pro-gun, or even if you're seriously anti-gun, because I have people like that listening as well, and I still invite them, or whether you're people in the middle, that maybe you're not against guns, but you're not really for guns, you're kind of in the middle somewhere, and trying to figure out stuff, and I welcome you. Thank you for being here, if that's you. But at the end of the day, I feel like there's kind of things get a little bit lost when we start talking about what is rights versus what is privileges. And I feel like as Americans, and unfortunately I'm not able to truthfully tell you universally that the First Amendment is embraced, but I think almost universally, at least generally, the First Amendment is embraced. That we the people as Americans, it's a very American ideal. That's something we very deeply believe in. It doesn't matter what your politics generally tend to be most of the time. But the First Amendment is something we all embrace. Well, most of us, the vast majority, right? That you can go out there, speak your mind, express yourself. Don't have to worry about getting arrested. Pray to whatever God you want, or not. Doesn't matter. Can't be, arrested or get fines. Things like that for it. These are all First Amendment stuff. These are all things that we all, most, unfortunately, I can't say all, but most Americans believe in. Now just think about that for a second. The people that you know, and even the people that are maybe friends or family members or people out there that you know that are very anti-gun, or maybe they're not totally on board here like we are. But then you think about the idea that what are their views on the First Amendment? Well, I think with reasonable suspicion, not to quote the law or statute here, but I think with general certainty, you could probably surmise that these people are on board with the First Amendment, generally speaking. And even if, unfortunately, we have people out there espousing reprehensible ideas or even hateful ideas that totally conflict with society, or at least our culture, our values as Americans. Ideas that are racist, ethically and morally just reprehensible, easy to reject, and in fact, easy to defeat in debate when you ever get one of these people for a debate. That's kind of a side note. But even the people that are espousing these horrible, hateful ideas, they all rally around and retreat back to the First Amendment, where they do have, at least what our Article 3 would consider standing. They do have the ability to do that. They do have that as a legal right. Now, if you are going to be a neo-Nazi, or you're going to be a communist, or anyone else who espouses a political idea that has killed literally tens of millions of people, your ideas may be morally bankrupt, morally reprehensible, ethically not going to work out in our country with our ideals, but you are still protected by your First Amendment to say those things. And I would argue that we should not stop it, and that does not mean we have the right to physically harm these people. That is not the right thing, and you're going to be on the hook for that. But they can utilize their First Amendment to do so, and it is up to us to use our intellect. In the last podcast, I talked about our pro-gun position, how much home field advantage that we have in this argument. The same thing kind of applies here. There's so much wrong with their arguments and everything they espouse, their ideas. It cannot actually add up and make sense. It is not ethical, it is not moral, but it is also not logical. It is easy to intellectually defeat these ideas, assuming you ever find someone intellectual enough on their side to actually debate you. And I'm not just saying that to put them down. I'm actually saying that, yes, to put them down, but I'm also saying that to tell you exactly how easy that is to defeat these ideas. Bad ideas that cannot stand on their own merits, and they need crutches of hatred and fear and emotions, or insert whatever. I attack bad ideas. I don't attack people. And these particular ideas are actually rather easy to defeat in debate. But they have the First Amendment right to be out there espousing communism, Nazism, KKK, all that stuff out there, reprehensible, indefensible, easy to defeat. But reeling this back in, trying to keep this on target, why am I going to open this thing with the First Amendment? Well, like I said, I would like to, and do that right now, but I'd like to introduce to you a new way of looking at the Second Amendment. Because how many times have you heard this? Somebody on the other side of the gun debate, or have different ideas about guns than you do, they come up like, well, you know, to get a car, of course, you need to go through your training and classes, whatever, and then when you purchase a automobile car, that you have to have it registered with the state, have the plates showing, and then you have to go to the DMV, right? You've got to take the written test, behind the wheel test, and you have to demonstrate that you can safely, and within the confines of the traffic laws, that you can operate this vehicle on the public highways before the state is willing to issue you a license to do so. And that's what we do with cars. Well, why don't we do that with guns? The very short, sweet, and just to the point answer on that is, in our Constitution, on our Bill of Rights, our first 10 amendments to our Constitution, natural, inalienable rights of mankind, we held these things to be self-evident. Things we believed, individual liberties. So important that we enshrined them in our founding document. Nowhere in that list of essential individual liberties is there a right to buy or own or drive a vehicle. Or, keeping in fairness with the change of times and technology, there's nowhere in there is the right to freely move or transport yourself or have a mode of transportation. Right? That's actually, we're kind of getting into 10th Amendment territory. 10th Amendment has kind of taken a beating over the years, decades. That's definitely its own podcast right there. But nowhere in our Bill of Rights do we talk about that. But we do specifically mention firearms, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and the fact that it shall not be infringed. Well, that's kind of a distinction there. And actually legally, now to my anti-gun people listening, of which I hope there's a lot, but I don't know how many of you there are, but I'm glad you're here. And of those in the middle, well, I would say, this is kind of a pretty big distinction here, but whether you particularly agree with how things, if this is how it should be, I'm just telling you how it is. Legally, lawfully speaking in our country with our Constitution, our laws. That driving, yes, legally is observed as and held to be within statute as a privilege. Whereas firearms ownership, as fortified by the 2008 Heller versus DC decision, of course, that is an individual right for lawful self-defense. So the short, sweet answer is driving is a privilege, as observed by the law. Firearms ownership is a right. Now let's get back to the whole opening of this podcast. Why would I start this thing with the First Amendment? Well, I'd like to introduce right now a different way of looking at the Second Amendment. And actually, this is something I've been doing for the past several years. And it helps me navigate this crazy world that we're living in. George Washington, of course, General of the Continental Army and our first president, he said, if you're ever having times of trouble, look to the Constitution to be your guide. That's paraphrased, and I don't have his exact quote, but he said something to that direct effect. I don't think he was wrong either. Look to the Constitution. So if we're looking at different things and we're unsure, well, okay, does this pass the litmus test here of whether this is appropriate or legal or proper, logical? Does this make sense? Are we being intellectually honest about this bill or this piece of legislation or this proposal to do some kind of assault weapons ban or some kind of, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s and AKs, whatever. Let's see if that passes the litmus test. Well, how do we do that? Well, what if perhaps I suggest that we, instead of focusing on the Second Amendment, what if somehow we could copy and then paste these ideas or suggestions or these attitudes towards the Second Amendment? What if we could copy and paste that and throw that on the First Amendment? Legally speaking, and this is actually kind of scary, but legally speaking, why not? If we're doing this to the Second Amendment, then what makes you think we can't possibly in the future do this to the First Amendment as well? If we create the legal foundation and tools to abuse and cut and shred and destroy, do harm to our Second Amendment, well, what makes you think magically the First Amendment is going to survive that as well in the future? So what if we just go ahead and copy and paste it? Just take it from the Second and we just throw it on the First Amendment. What would that potentially look like? When you do this, things start to get a little scary. Things start to feel very un-American. Things start to kind of go off the rails a little bit. So much so that they might call you crazy for just even suggesting it. What is that going to look like? Well, here we go. So, we're not saying that you can't go to church. We believe in everyone's right to go to church. Of course, that's the First Amendment. We're just saying there's no reason anybody should be able to go to church more than once every 30 days. Why would anybody need to go to church any more than once every 30 days? Now, those of you in the free states, if you've always lived in a free state, you don't know what I'm talking about. Those of you who have escaped a banned state, you know exactly what I'm talking about, or currently living in one, that you can only buy one handgun or one firearm every 30 days. Nobody needs to buy a gun more than once every 30 days, right? Los Angeles city limits, talking to you chiefly. So how does that look on our First Amendment? Well, things start to get a little weird, but let's go ahead and keep going, shall we? We're not saying you can't have a Bible or a Quran or a Torah or a religious text in your home. We're not saying that. We're just saying that it needs to have a serial number and it needs to be registered to an owner. And that way, if it gets stolen, well, this is to help you. This is not for us. Who would say that? This is to help you. Because if it gets stolen out of your home, but it was registered to you, well then when it gets recovered, well then we're going to know that it's yours and we can give it back to the right original lawful owner of it. But we're going to have a Bible, Torah, Quran, any religious text, Book of Mormon, whatever it is. It's going to have a serial number. It's going to be registered to an owner. And we need the address of where it's going to be stored. So that way we can help you. Things start okay, now we're kind of cranking up the volume a little bit here on the whole 1984 potential George Orwell kind of situation. I don't want to raise that flag quite yet, but you can feel it in your bones right now. Doesn't this feel that, aren't we kind of going in a very negative, kind of concerning place? Yeah, as an American, yes, we are going in a very scary place. But we can keep going. And in fact, we can get going here so far that political correctness be damned. We're about to go somewhere that nobody even wants to think about, but this might be a fair comparison, I would say. Here we go. We're going to drop the nuclear device. Here it goes. We're not saying you can't be religious. Look, we support the First Amendment, okay? Well, our founding fathers were spiritual and, whatever. People were doing religion and stuff. That's fine. We're not saying you can't be religious. That's crazy. We're just saying that there are certain religions that are a little more dangerous than others. So we would like you to be, and in fact, by way of policy and legislation, we're going to ensure that you can only be Christian or Jewish or whatever. But some of these more dangerous religions out there, well, there's no reason anybody needs to be participating in or subscribing to those religions. We just can't have that. That is far too dangerous. They need to be banned. Well, now we have really gotten to a very scary place, have we not? Well, let's take it even a step further. We're not saying that you can't have a social media account or a YouTube or a Twitter or social media, whatever it is. We're not saying that. Of course we believe in the First Amendment, the right of freedom of speech. That's fine. We're just saying that if you would like to have a Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or social media account, well, we just need you to go get a license. We get a license to drive a car. Well, why would you not obtain a license and have a registered account with the state? Why would you not obtain a license for this? We already do that for cars, whatever. Come on down. All we require, we're not saying you can't have a social media account. We're just saying that you need to come get a license. So you got to do some training, some government training, and then you have to pass a written test. And then you have to put your height, your middle name, your weight, your full name, height, weight, race, ethnicity, yes, 10A and 10B of the ATF Form 4473. And you have to tell us, about all of your past. We're going to run a background check on you, and, we'll see about it. But if you pass to our liking, everything's fine, well, then we're going to issue a license, and then you get to have a social media account. Things are kind of, if they already have not been redlining, things are a little scary. Now, of course, when I proposed this idea, well, what if I paralleled the Second Amendment to these ideas, the same things, we just put them on the First Amendment? What do you guys think about that? And then I have my pro-gun control people that like, well, you're crazy. That sounds crazy. You must be wearing a tinfoil hat. This is insane. This is crazy what you're talking about. And I tell them, well, I agree. Is this not crazy? This is insane. This is anti-American. This is everything against what we believe in. So why are you trying to do that to our Second Amendment? And secondly, and probably more importantly, why would you think that you can do this stuff to the Second Amendment and somehow think that this could never possibly go wrong? Somehow We have this idea that we can just abuse and cut down and legally restrict and provide the legal foundations and give the tools needed to do this to one amendment on our Constitution. But somehow we're so high and mighty, we feel so important. We're on our high horse to the point where we don't think this could ever come back around and burn us. We don't think that ever these legal tools and foundations that we allow for this to happen on the Second Amendment, we don't think somehow this could be turned around in the future someday, that maybe it could be used towards the First Amendment. Somehow we think that's impossible. Are we really that arrogant? And as the historian, I would say, are we really that ignorant of history? That's something I submit to you. It's how we look at the Second Amendment, how we think about it, but really, rights versus privileges. How we think of our rights. What are we willing to do to one of our amendments on our Bill of Rights, on our Constitution? These are our rights. We've already been over that. How do we think about our rights? How do we think about the potential ideas of pieces of policy, legislation, bills, potential restrictions? What harm is this going to do to our Constitution? The last podcast I said, the harm to the Second Amendment and at large the Bill of Rights. This is what I was talking about. How or why do we think this could never, what goes around comes around? How do we think if we go around, it's never going to come around? How do we think this could never be used against us on something else in the future? Probably more importantly and more impossibly, how could you convince me that could never be the case someday in the future? I don't even know what's going to be in the news tomorrow. In the next 10 minutes. How are you going to guarantee this is going to last forever? Eternally, as our Constitution was meant to be written. If we have problems, we can change it. We've already done that 27 times. But if we are providing the legal foundation, the legal tools and the abilities to do this to one of our amendments in our personal Bill of Rights in our Constitution, this is your America, okay? Whatever gender, race, ethnicity, background, wherever you're from, this is your America too. These are your rights too, and I cannot stress that enough. We are all part of the same American family. This is your rights. This is your Constitution too. We the people, are we going to allow something like this to happen to our rights, of which we're not given by government? They cannot be taken away by government without due process after we have proven or been proven of committing criminal acts or things that would strip us of our rights based on our own actions proven in the court of law. Innocent until proven guilty, right? There was a time when that was the thing. At least we'd like to profess or think that we believe that way. Due process. These are our rights. What makes you think that what you do to one is not going to transfer over to the other or another? And when you start looking at the Second Amendment like that, legally, as its status, lawfully speaking, in statute, in our Constitution, with our laws, you start looking at it like that, you might start getting a little weird when you start to copy and paste that on something else. Oh, and it gets real interesting when you start throwing these ideas on the Fourth Amendment. Believe me. It gets horrible when you start throwing that on the Fifth Amendment. But I use the First Amendment here because, like I said, I think the vast majority of Americans, unfortunately I can't say all, but the vast majority of Americans believe in the First Amendment, believe in freedom of expression, even if it's hateful, even if it's offending, even if it's whatever. That is your right. That's one of the more universal unifying factors that we all believe in, right? Well, what if we took these ideas on the Second and put them on the First Amendment? Now what? Well, now it looks scary, does it not? And now I'd like to go back and just clarify two things that maybe I didn't do a good job articulating to you, so you really know my thoughts on it. The first would be the free travel thing, and me saying that you don't have a right to own a car or drive. That is a privilege. And lawfully speaking, yes, that is the truth. And I was comparing that to free travel. It's not that you don't have a right to freely travel. What I was attempting to say was, you, even back in their day, in fairness, thinking of technology, You didn't have a right to own a horse. Or if you wanted to freely travel, which in those days would require you to get on a barge, use a canal or a river, or go down a toll road, you would either have to walk, you would have to obtain your own horse, or if you wanted to get on that barge and freely travel, well, you would have to pay for the ticket. That's what I was trying to say back there. But no, it's not a restriction on freely traveling. It's just you don't have the right to do it, and you can't sit there and expect that you're going to get a free ticket to get on the barge, or a free ticket to hop on a train, or a free plane ticket, that a car is just going to magically be provided to you, or in those days, a horse. That's the point of what I was trying to get to back there. Now, the second thing is something I intentionally slipped in. Maybe some of you kind of piqued your interest when I said it. I was talking about reprehensible ideas. And yes, the First Amendment does, in fact, cover that speech. Yes, even hate speech or offensive speech. Yes, the First Amendment does cover that. And in that discussion, I locked in neo-Nazis with communists. And I brushed by it. Didn't even make a distinction there. And my elaboration on that is, I vehemently reject any ideologies that have a kill count into the millions, tens of millions. And I think for the neo-Nazis, prime directive there is hatred. Some idea of a master race and everything that doesn't fit in that small, arbitrarily defined box. Well, now we need to hate it or fear it. And for the communists, I think it's more about ignorance, and there's no way to sugarcoat that. I don't think their motives for believing in that are the same. But whether it's ignorance or hate, these are ideas that I find to be completely morally bankrupt, that destroy the human spirit, that are against free enterprise, destroy and break down, have no recognition of human dignity and rights. These things I find to be completely morally bankrupt and reprehensible. So yes, I will include them in the same group. At least in the case of the communists, I think they are trying to convince us to get on a train of where the tracks are incomplete at this huge bridge that is not finished. And the train is going to vault over the cliff, and everyone on it is going to die. And even they perhaps don't realize it. Whatever the motive is, if that is our destination, by intentional design, or by ignorance, by hate, by fear, I find these things to be reprehensible, easily rejectable, and I do reject them. And whether you're in whatever particular movement for ignorance or hate, whatever your angle is, you don't see the writing on the wall, espousing ideas that have no respect for human dignity, basic human rights, well then yes, I'm going to reject it. And especially if we have tens of millions of people who have died because of it, well then yes, I'm going to lock you all into the same reprehensible group of things that I reject. And they still have their First Amendment rights to think what they want to think and say what they want to say. Yes, even hate speech or offensive speech, no matter how much we detest it, we think it's gross, it is their First Amendment right to do so. Chiefly being the fact they can't be arrested for it. Just wanted to clear those things up before we move on. And now I'm going to ask a question directed at my people in favor of gun control, or maybe people in the middle as well. You've heard some of us pro-gun people saying this. Not one more inch, not one more law, not one more restriction, not one more ban, not one more measure, not one more inch. And if you are in favor of gun control, or maybe even in the middle, you might say, well, why are they, stonewalling anything that could ever happen? There's not going to be any compromise, or there's not going to be any change if we have one side that doesn't even want to inch. They don't even want to move, not 1 inch. Why are they so stubborn? And I would like to submit to you as a response that everything I've just laid out, and there's also no fun or sugar-coated way to say this, but I think, more accurately speaking, we are not simply concerned with just the matters that appear before us at any given day. We're not simply just concerned with proposed things or laws or pieces of news or issues that are immediately in our face in this moment. We are not simply playing checkers here. We, in the pro-gun community, are playing chess. We are looking moves ahead. Trying our best to look into the future. And I believe, yes, we're living in the moment, but we're also reaching and looking into the future. And to help us on that path, it does require us to also look back. Understand our history, and understand it was not always beautiful. Understand that, yes, in our country at one time, slavery, owning human beings, was legal. Absolutely reprehensible. And you can cite all kinds of things. Forcing Native Americans out of their land, breaking our own treaties with them and pushing them along, committing atrocities. And this is the government that I need to entrust and relinquish my civil liberties and my rights to? Is this not the same government that, in a more recent example, threw Japanese Americans in camps? We still have people alive today who lived in those camps. We still have people who are very close, generationally speaking, to actual slaves, people who were slaves. Short memories. And this being the same government that you insist I entrust everything to, that I relinquish this to, and I should have nothing to fear. Nobody's saying that they're coming for all your guns. Nobody's out there. You're the crazy one. But am I, though? If I'm looking at the future, I'm understanding what's immediately in front of me, but especially I'm looking back at the track record here. I think it's not crazy of me to have some concerns. And when you start looking at the Second Amendment in that interesting way that I propose to you, and you start paralleling those arguments and those attitudes onto another amendment, and you're looking several moves ahead and you're looking into the future, you're not just playing chess, but you're also looking beyond that. You're thinking what happens after the chess game. People, maybe they're only playing checkers, they come up to you and ask you, why are you so stubborn? Why you believe not one more inch, not one more law, not one more thing? If we could just do this, then it would make us safer. If we could just do this. Doesn't that remind you of somebody? Ben Franklin? Anyone? And again, I don't have his direct quote, but I'm paraphrasing to the effect of those who are willing to surrender essential liberties to obtain temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety. Something directly to that effect, paraphrased. And I don't think he was wrong either. So for those of you who don't understand why, how could we be so stubborn? Why are we this way? Why do we insist in the pro-gun community not one more inch? Well, when you are seeing it as we see it, you are looking forward, you are looking backward, and you are taking an honest inventory of what we have and how things are right now. You start thinking about what is possible, what is a potential circumstance that could happen. Maybe if you start understanding that, you may understand why we have the position of not one more inch. Because as far as I'm concerned, since 1934, every time something has happened, we've always been hauled in to meet in the middle. Gun owners and pro-gun people, we're hauling you back in again. Something horrible just happened. We're bringing you in again, and you have to meet us in the middle. What are you giving up now? What can we get from you? Just squeezing, wringing it out like a towel, getting every drop they can possibly get. Sold or masqueraded under the guise that it's a compromise. It's common sense. This is necessary. All I've seen over the decades since then, it just seems like every time we've come in, it's just a matter of how much are we going to lose, not a matter of how much we get back. And by way of rights, it seems to me that generally you only lose and you never gain. If you adopt the policy that you don't want to lose anything, that might be your best bet. And I know those in favor of gun restrictions or gun control, I know you don't see it as we do. And I know some of the things I've said in this podcast may confuse you or perplex you, not because you're dumb. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you're not seeing how your fellow Americans are seeing this. And if you ever scratch your head wondering why we would be this way, why would we be so stubborn? Why would we be so unwilling? If you ever found yourself wondering that, I would urge for you to look at it as we do. Look forward, but also look backward. And ask yourself honestly, do we have a track record here of which something we can trust? Is this something I will gladly relinquish civil liberties to, with no fear and no concern that, nothing could go wrong with this, ever? Another quote, which I'm going to have to paraphrase, because I came so unprepared. And if I had known it gone here, I would have obtained these quotes. It's actually the rise of the Nazi Party, talking like Weimar Republic Germany in the 30s, as things are moving on. And the Holocaust is slowly starting to work its way, unfortunately, into its evil. And as the ramp up is happening, there's a quote from a man who said, to the effect of, when they came for the Jewish people, I didn't say anything because I'm not Jewish. And when they came for the Bolsheviks or the socialists, well, I didn't stand up for them because I'm not one of them. And when they came for the insert whatever else, well, I didn't stand up for them because that wasn't me. But now when they came for me, there was no one left to help stand up for me. How does that make sense here? That makes sense that maybe right now, if you are in favor of gun control, that you have no problems with people coming after the Second Amendment. I never said anything because I'm not a gun owner. I wasn't about the Second Amendment, so I didn't say anything. In fact, perhaps going back to the Beto O'Rourke moment, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s, your AKs. What I did not mention previously, something that did in fact disturb me, is how much applause did he get? How much applause did he get in that moment? Regrettably, he got a lot. It was disturbing to see that, and right now we have people who are willing to cheer on trespasses on the Second Amendment. Well, I didn't stand up for it because that wasn't me. And again, what makes them think that nothing ever could possibly go wrong with this? That someday the same tools that I cheered on and approved and was happy that this was happening to my Second Amendment, and I never thought it would come for the First Amendment or some other amendment. I never thought that these same tools and these same practices and legal precedents that I was helping set when we were doing this to the Second Amendment, I didn't stand up then because that wasn't me and I didn't care. But now that I see these things being used against the First Amendment, well, who's going to stand up for it now? looking ahead, but also looking back. And given the track record, not just of our own history as Americans, but world history, I don't think that I'm being crazy. I don't believe that I am crazy, and I don't think I'm in tinfoil hat land when I start making these suggestions of, hey, I think we could have a potential problem here, and I think we need to proceed with caution when we start talking about doing things to the Second Amendment. And as I said in the previous podcast with former Supreme Court Justice Stevens coming out in an op-ed saying, I think it's time to repeal the Second Amendment. And as crazy as that was, that actually is something that I have been thinking for a while. What if you guys, if you wanted to clamp down on guns so hard, why don't you guys just come out and submit a change to our Constitution? Try to pass up an amendment, go through the procedure to repeal the Second Amendment. Why don't you guys just do that? Because it's going to do us a couple favors. First of all, it's going to allow you just to come forward in honesty about what you're really about. And I think for once that's going to be refreshing. But secondly, for the Bill of Rights at large, just out of respect for our other amendments to protect them, stop trying to erode and chip away at a standing American civil liberty, an amendment in our Bill of Rights, without actually removing it and just weakening its power, even though it's still there. Maybe the best tactic for you guys is to go ahead and recommend that, because at least we know that you're going to be honest and you can just come to us in honesty. We don't have to play these games. We don't have to stand up there in the aftermath of atrocity. Use these poor victims as our bargaining chips for our political arguments. Disgusting. Maybe that would do us all a favor. Especially with our intentionally slow process for passing bills into law. But in conclusion here, I just wanted to introduce a different way of looking at the Second Amendment, or a different way of looking at our rights and our Bill of Rights just as a whole. Maybe some of you guys have already kind of been there doing this. And I invite people in favor of gun control, I invite you to look at it as well. And you may, of course, accuse us of being crazy or how outlandish that sounds. But I really want you to think about it legally, though. Remove the emotion and just legally look at it. What would stop it from happening to something else? Is that really that far of a stretch to suggest, legally speaking, that things you do to one could not someday ever be used to dismantle another? Is that really that big of a stretch in the grand scheme of things? Are we that arrogant to think that nothing wrong will ever happen if we do something like this? Are we that ignorant of history to think that nothing like that has been done before? Yes, even in our own country. I am proud of my country. I'm proud of my country. We the people, I think we do have a lot to be proud of. We have some uniquely American ideals. We were not perfect when our country was founded, and I would say we are still not perfect, but we were challenged eternally to continue to always strive to make a more perfect union. And over time, I think we have been moving in that direction. We must continue to hold ourselves to a very high standard. We're not like everyone else. I don't apologize for thinking of it that way either. That we do have, in fact, something beautiful and something unique here. In fact, every time that I've come back to our country, it, honest to God, looks that much more beautiful to me. Especially with some of the places that I've lived. We do have something here. Something worth, in my opinion, and something I've put to action. I do believe we have something beautiful that is worth defending. I do believe we have something unique, something to be proud of, something we should always continue to strive to make it a more perfect union. I believe these things, and we can. And one thing that's going to help get us there is if we better understand each other. Actually, go talk with your intellectual opponents. So I leave you with this. And as always, I'm curious what your thoughts are, what you think of these ideas, and I thank you so very much for joining me.